Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the third day of the CFA 2023 Equity Conference. This conference is entitled Co-Conspiring for an Equitable Future, Building the Social Justice Bridge. Some of you have been with us all week. Some of you are just joining us today. We welcome you all here, and we're so happy for you to give us your time today. My name is Leslie Bryan. I am the co-chair of the Disability Caucus. I'm a recently retired lecturer from Cal State San Bernardino, 25 years in the theater arts department, which I miss dearly, but I so love doing this work with the union instead. I'll describe myself. I'm an African-American middle-aged woman, light skin with curly short hair. I'm wearing a teal colored long sleeve sports kind of shirt. I have on silver earrings. I have black framed glasses. Behind me, I have my two favorite pictures, one of two little black girls at the beach, and another one of three black women in their church lady hats. And then between them, I have my CFA flyer that has rights, respect, and justice on it, which is our theme for all of our work. So before we get started, and keeping with CFA tradition, I would like to do the land acknowledgement that has been approved by our CFA Native American and Indigenous Peoples Caucus. There's going to be a link dropped in the chat so that you can find your own lands. And if you would like to, you can put the name of that in the chat as well. We want to acknowledge that we gather as the California Faculty Association on the traditional land of the indigenous people, past and present, and honor with gratitude the land itself and the people who have stewarded it throughout the generations. This calls for us to commit to continuing to learn how to be better stewards of the land we inhabit as well. To recognize the land is an expression of gratitude and appreciation to those whose territories we reside on, and a way of honoring the indigenous people who have been living and working on the land from time immemorial. It is important to understand the long-standing history that has brought us to reside on the land and to seek understanding in our place within that history. Land acknowledgements do not exist in a past tense or historical context. Colonialism is a current, ongoing process, and we need to build our mindfulness of our present participation. Acknowledging the land is an important indigenous protocol that we are honoring here today. And so Jamila probably put the link in there for the lands. I am on the Tongva lands right now that I live on and used to work on. So I'd like to do a collective breath with all of us. Take my glasses off. If you would like, you can go off video if you would like some privacy. And this is just to bring us in the moment. You may have been coming from a class or coming from another meeting, another Zoom equity meeting, but just to bring us in the moment here and now. Whatever adaptations you need to do in this collective breath within your own body, please feel free to make that choice and adapt as needed. So we're just going to sit up nice and tall in our seats, trying to elongate your spine if you're able to. We spend a lot of time slouching in these Zoom meetings. And we're going to take a nice breath in through the nose and hold that for a moment. And whenever it feels good for you, exhale that breath. If you'd like, you can soften your gaze or close your eyes. We've been looking at the screen for a long time, so it might help to break that focal point with the screen. And inhaling again. And then let that breath out. And bringing our mind and our focus into this moment, into this work. So excited to hear what Alex has to share with us. And then bringing our focus in, whatever may be in the room, distracting you, to let that fall away. Take a deep breath in. And exhale. And I'm just moving my head a little bit, my neck. Just kind of twisting a little bit, trying to get the tightness out. And then just bringing my focus into the room. And a last breath we'll do together if you can. You can stretch your arms up. I'm always looking to see if I'm gonna knock something over. And then let that come down, arms come down, and let that breath come back out. And when you're ready, open your eyes if they were closed. Turn your gaze back because we're gonna have a fabulous speaker. And turn your video back on video. So I have one more thing that I'd like to do first before I turn it over. We have a CFA interruption practice statement that we do at all our gatherings. So I'd like to read that for you now. As part of our continuing commitment to racial justice work, when we experience examples of racial narratives, racism, or whiteness in our meetings, or as we conduct our business, we will speak up. This means we can interrupt the meeting and draw the issue to one another's attention. We will do this kindly, with care, and in good faith. Further, as we engage interruptions, we will take an intersectional approach, reflecting the fact that white supremacy and racism operate in tandem with interlocking systems of oppression, of a colonialism, class, cis heteropatriarchy, and ableism. This statement is a reminder that we commit to do this in the service of ending the system of racial oppression. So I would like to turn this over to Jamila, who is our CFA administrative assistant, who's going to talk us through some logistics, some housekeeping kind of stuff.
Thanks, Leslie. I think you need to turn off your mic because, oh, okay, you already did it. All right, never mind. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here. I'm really excited for this talk today. I just have a few bits of helpful information for us. We have a ASL and closed captioning services being provided. To turn on the closed captioning, please go to the show captions button at the bottom of your screen and then click the show subtitle to view the captions. The ASL interpreters will be spotlighted throughout the webinar, so you don't have to worry about that if it is needed. This webinar is also being recorded and will be posted to the CFA YouTube and CRSJ webpage later on. We do have meal reimbursement for Equity Conference. If you attend one meeting, it's $28, and if you attend two, it's $59. I will be dropping into the chat the member expense form. I will also be dropping links into the chat to the Equity Conference landing page, the registration links if you need to register for any other sessions, the book vendor for the books written by the speakers at this year's Equity Conference, and also to the bargaining survey that you can fill out again. Thank you, and I'll pass it back to Leslie.
Thank you. Oops, 1 second here. So I'm going to let Alex Locust introduce themselves, but first I want to tell you about the workshop. I'll give you a little bit of the workshop description. So this is called Adopting a Disability Justice Framework. And Alex writes, whether on the runway or in counseling session, Alex aspires to embody the tenets of social justice and fiercely advocates for equity in all community spaces. Armed with bombastic humor, charm, and a sharp wit, Alex synthesizes his professional insight with his lived experience to create engaging workshops grounded in cultural humility, intersectionality, and fostering empathetic, holistic views of marginalized communities. And I'm so excited to hear all of what you have to say, Alex. I'm going to let you introduce yourself and turn it over to you.
Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, everyone, for helping to facilitate all of the back of house stuff for the Zoom, and gratitude to the interpreters. My name, as Leslie mentioned, is Alex Locust. You can call me Glamputee if you're nasty. I use he, she, and they pronouns interchangeably. And today we're going to talk about disability justice. So before I jump in, I will offer an audio description for myself as well. I am a tan, Black, biracial, queer babe. I've got like a long curly black mane, mustache, glasses. I'm doing kind of like 80s power blazer with some floral print and a pearl necklace. And I'm reporting live from my closet in San Francisco, California, which gratitude to the land acknowledgement is on unceded Ohlone Rainbow land. So just want to share that now. I'm going to share my screen and we're just going to dive in. All right, so for today, I know Leslie offered kind of the formal title for this workshop. I would say, you know, I'm having a little bit of fun and I'm calling today a leg up on disability justice. Framing it kind of like, you know, America's newest favorite game show. I know, you know, we are 3 years deep in this pandemic. The remote energy of a Zoom, particularly for a webinar, right, might be hard to like engage, or maybe the spirit feels kind of like a lecture. And so I want to frame this as something that even if the Q&A is mostly how we'll interact today, that it still is something that I like, were we to be in a smaller group or, excuse me, a setting where we can engage. Like, I love people to participate. I want that buzzer energy, right? We got to be having fun, right, and playing with it. So that's kind of the frame today. That's the reason for the color, for the energy. I'm sure you'll see this metaphor throughout. So a little bit about myself, right? I'm your hostess with the mostest. Leslie already offered the intro that I've written about myself, but just to give you some background, I refer to myself as a disability justice activist and artist. I'm a community organizer. You know, as a millennial, I feel like it's my birthright to be a multi hyphenate. So I perform drag. I am a film festival juror. I've been on several nonprofit boards, right? I've done some adjunct lecturing at SF State. I'm a alumni of SF State, so you know, I'm at home with the CSU. And all of my work is really a celebration of the harmony of my identity as a queer person, as a Black biracial person, as a disabled person. I really want to kind of leave my mark, right, in both disability justice history and just as a cultural change agent. So if you want to learn more about me, as I mentioned, I am a millennial. I'm also a Leo, so I leave a very large digital footprint. There's plenty on the internet if you want to know more, but I'd love to spend more of the time today talking about these concepts, and I'll weave in some of my personal experiences throughout. So how today is going to look, right, on today's episode, we are going to first define disability and ableism. You know, some people might be familiar with those concepts, but I like to ensure that we're all on the same page for larger exploration. We're going to embody disability justice. We're going to talk about what that looks like, right? Not just talk about the ways that ableism is causing harm, but we can talk about how do we uproot ableism? How do we strive towards this collective liberation? I'll offer a celebration of disability culture, you know, not just talk about things as if they're theory, but really lift up the people and voices that are contributing to the movement right now. And I'll end, you know, with some question and discovery, right? I got that term from Adrienne Marie Brown and Sonia Renee Taylor, who've kind of flipped that and explored this idea of like discovering together rather than me necessarily like answering everything that comes up. In terms of guidelines, right, or agreements, or how I like to, you know, how I'm hosting this game show. You know, I'm a counselor by training. I feel like community agreements are really helpful. I'm really grateful for Leslie for doing that grounding breath. So it's good to kind of just center here and pause. As a facilitator committed to disability justice, I want to model how to center access and accessibility in the way that I facilitate, right, as I offer public speaking. So there's been a lot of great access features already modeled, whether it's audio description, So that way I'm not assuming what you can or cannot see of me as a speaker. I'll also make sure to describe everything on screen, so that way I don't say things like, as you can see, right? We don't know if you can see. We've got sign language interpreters supporting us today. I saw that there's possibility for live transcript, right? So captioning. Also, just as Leslie mentioned, right, maybe sitting up straight, if that helps, just kind of like be focused, but also, you know, sitting for 90 minutes can be hard for somebody. So if you need to lay down, if you need to stand up and pace, stim, right, the beauty of this format is that you can access this learning however it works for you, and you're off camera, right? You can do so comfortably in your own space. I also, you know, the next one, number 2, play to win. You know, we're really digging into this game show metaphor. I'm inviting, right, like think about if you watched a game show and nobody hit the buzzers, nobody chimed in. It's just kind of like a host asking questions and, you know, no responses. So you can't win if you don't play. I'm considering a win here just participating. I would love anything in the Q&A that helps you better engage, helps you feel like you're getting your questions kind of out there. I really want to be a resource today. So just ask yourself, you know, if we go through this next 75 minutes and there's nothing that you've asked or probed or reflected on, you know, where's that coming from? What can you do to dig deeper? Is it discomfort? Is it uncertainty, right? Do you feel totally saturated and maybe you just want to take this in? Just kind of think about some of that. Another one that I want to invite is this idea of starting inward and moving outward, right? So this is an invitation to think about, I think sometimes when we explore like anti-oppression work, it's easy to go to like, okay, I'm going to think about how I can support my community or how I can support my students, or my role is to do this. And I think what can happen is then we're not thinking about how these concepts apply to us, right? And we're jumping to fix problems rather than to figure out how to embody them. So, you know, as we go through examples, as we think about these concepts, please think about like, how does this apply to you, right? How do you resonate with what we're talking about? How can you kind of make those changes so that way when you go to apply it to your staff meetings, to your campus culture, to your class, right? Then you're coming from a place of being grounded, right? Number 4, just an introduction. I feel like that's kind of obvious, right? That 75 minutes is not enough time to really do any depth work, but I do feel like it's important to answer or to name aloud, just if it does feel like the pacing doesn't match some of the content. It's not due to like the value of the content or the importance, but more just the matter of the space. And lastly, right, I'm a pleasure activist at heart. I've already kind of given a shout out to Adrienne Marie Brown. And so I want this to be fun, right? Obviously, a game show is a very clear invitation to be playful, to treat this as a joyful space. And that's to model that these conversations are ones that we can have anytime, right? Over coffee, you know, over happy hour cocktails, right? At dinner with our friends, in staff meetings. These things don't have to be like the very special episode, right? Talking about disability justice doesn't mean that we're like pulling the e-brake and everything becomes really serious and yeah, dry, right? I think that's something that I become very exhausted by. So I'm going to be cheesy. There's going to be silly GIFs. I'm going to tell ridiculous stories. I hope that you enjoy the ride along with me. And yeah, we'll do our best, right? I've got this Wheel of Fortune GIF saying we're going to risk it. It's time to be courageous. I'm going to tap into that Leo energy. If there's any other community agreements that you find helpful in these kind of learning spaces, I welcome those in the Q&A. That way I can ensure I'm inviting those as well. And yeah, I'll go to get started. I want to just acknowledge Lisa in the chat offered a reminder, right, that part-time lecturers are not adjunct in terms of like non-essential, and do teach the majority of classes. I want to just name, if my language was not as impeccable as it could have been there, that's my mistake. I definitely recognize the importance and value of those lecture faculty, and yeah, I'm grateful to everyone who's in the space, particularly those folks who are doing that essential work. So to get started, let's talk about, oh, I wanted to do just kind of a little warm up, right? I've got this buzzer check, right? I've got my queen right here on screen, Hermione, right? She's doing the quintessential, right? I've got a question, I know the answer. She is kind of modeling what I would love folks to do, is to just like, right, we're doing the buzzer metaphor. So in this game show, I would love, you know, if you use the Q&A, or even if you just write this down for yourself, but just as an engagement exercise, I would love in whatever form feels good to you, to just share, you know, looks like you might have your Zoom set up to have your name and pronouns if you're comfortable, but share on a scale of 1 to 10, how well do you feel your training explored disability? That training could be, excuse me, grad school, it could be training that your campus has provided, right? It could be training from other jobs. You know, you can kind of do an aggregate, whatever, 1 to 10, right? 1, let's say, is like, I am a dry sponge, Alex. Like, I have never been taught about disability. I came to this session because I like am ready to soak up everything that you have to offer. And 10 could be like, Alex, tag me in. I will do this workshop for you. It's Friday. Kick your foot up. Relax. I'll take it from here. And then the third question, right, in your response with your readiness is, what's one intention that you have for the session? I would love to know, you know, you came to the session for a reason. What's your intention? What, you know, are you looking to learn? Are you looking to challenge what you already have a sense of? Is disability justice, like, you know, your North Star along with mine, and you're looking to like explore that in the context of this conference? Whatever answers you want to share, let's take a moment. I'll read some of the things that come in aloud, and then we will keep moving. All right, I see some gratitude from Megan. I appreciate it. I'm glad the positive energy is coming through. We're gonna like have some fun today. Anik offered a 9. I love that readiness. I can't wait to share space with you. Maureen named a 3, right? Looking to learn. That's also exciting, right? To hear someone is like at that beginning stage and are here. I hope that I can like offer some insight to those kind of things. Let's see, Mary has offered a 4. The framework says it all, my awareness of disabilities and how to accommodate seems scattered, and then like more intentionality. Definitely we can look at kind of weaving some of those, if it feels piecemeal, right, bringing it together. I see somebody offered disability justice wasn't centered in their training, right? So it's important to kind of like bring that to the forefront, based on like building on research. Sloan said 2, learning more about disability justice, accessibility. Looking forward to the session. Thank you. Seeing some readiness. I'm seeing some dry sponges, right? Like maybe some people are fresh out of the pack, and sometimes that energy is like really helps the space kind of move in the way that people like, you're just ready, right? So keep those questions coming. I love all these. I'm just doing a kind of a quick scan because I'm seeing plenty of engagement. I definitely can't read all of these right now, but I appreciate this. It looks like your buzzers are working, which is great. Please keep that up as we kind of go through. Please do not hesitate. I will kind of pause at the different kind of, I'll call them rounds of the game show, just to check in and see if there are some questions that I haven't answered. So I'll definitely kind of take a look when I play some videos. But the Q&A is yours to use. I will definitely keep an eye on it throughout. So buzzers are working. Your host is ready. It's time for round one, right? Disability and ableism. How do we define disability in a more contemporary context and situate ableism among other systems of oppression? This is my attempt to do some ground rule setting to get us all on the same page before we get into some of the bigger, more elevated topics. So here on this page, I have definitions from the World Health Organization around disability. Often when I ask people as I'm in public spaces, I'm like, how would you define disability? Many times people focus on, someone who can't do things or struggles with certain activities or things like that, right? And really what people are describing there is what the World Health Organization would say is an impairment, right? That's just a problem in body function or structure. Now we can even, in the scope of this workshop, interrogate this idea of like a quote problem. But for the sake of just kind of getting started, we're saying an impairment is a problem in body function or structure. So as an amputee, my left leg never clocked in. I was born this way, said, I'm not showing up for that shift. That's not for me, right? Maybe it interviewed and it was like, I got a different job. But what I do know is that standing for long periods of time, walking really far distances on my crutches, trying to carry things on my crutches in a public space, those can be challenging, right? I feel an impairment in that situation, but I don't necessarily feel disabled just because I'm an amputee. Disability comes in, as the World Health Organization would define, as a complex phenomenon that reflects the interactions between features of a person's body and features of the society in which they live. So this is really the Venn diagram that we want to honor and name, is that it's not just that I'm an amputee, it's that I'm an amputee in a society that is inaccessible to people with bodies like mine, right? So it's going to a museum with very few places to sit, so I'm expected to stand for long periods of time. Or it's going on a trip with friends and having people say, let's go on a little hike. It'll just be like 15 to 30 minutes, and it turns into an hour or two, right? And I'm kind of like stuck out in this place that I wasn't prepared to be. It's also people asking me invasive questions about my body, right? I'm in public and people say, what happened to you? Why don't you wear a prosthetic, right? Those experiences are things that make me feel disabled. Those are disabling experiences. It's not just about what my body can or can't do. It's about what my body can or can't do and how it is perceived in a society that treats bodies like mine the way that it does. And so the good news is that because we are members of society, that we can change how disabled people or people with impairments experience the world. That brings me to these ideas of the medical versus the social model of disability. So the medical model is sort of that former definition that I offered, right? People are focused just on like what's quote unquote wrong with someone's body. So you see a blind person, you are interacting with a deaf person, someone in your life is immunocompromised or has a diagnosis of schizophrenia or depression or anxiety. These are saying that basically the medical model, right? Doctors, mental health providers, right? Care practitioners are saying like, this is how body and minds are supposed to look, act, behave. And if you don't fall within those bounds, if you deviate from the quote norm, then that means you're disabled. Right? There's kind of just this binary. their hope or the goal is to apply medicine, and medicine could either be like literally prescriptions and medication. It could also be assistive devices like a prosthetic, a hearing aid, crutches, right? It could be like mental health counseling, right? Any of those kind of things. You use those things to, quote, fix somebody, right? So to get them to approximate the norm or to become the norm, or then you're broken, right? You're irreparable. That's just kind of like who you are. What the medical model is saying is that those medical professionals are the experts, right? They define the norm. They define how we should be, what we should be aspiring towards. And the only way that disabled bodies can become, quote, better is through them, right? And the issue, as I'm sure I'm kind of being very leading here, is that it takes a lot of power and agency away from individuals to feel like experts in their own experience, right? It basically says, if you are having trouble in our society, it's because of your body mind, right? Your body mind, your embodied experience is the problem, and you need to fix it in order to be better. It's not that our government doesn't have universal healthcare. It's not that people stare at you in public, right? It's your body's problem. And that's what we want to kind of interrogate. We want to move away from. And that's what the social model is for. The social model is saying that disability is something that's caused by society's reaction to these variations, right? These very natural, real variations in the human body mind, right? And that solutions to those experiences of disability lie in society. So making spaces more accessible, disrupting microaggressions, right? And individuals are experts in their own body mind. So if someone is living with schizophrenia and they feel like they can show up to work, if they're forming healthy relationships, if they are able to like follow through with daily life activities, they might not feel disabled. They're like, I'm good, right? And so it's not for us to say, well, you're supposed to have no symptoms. It's like, but if they're fine with having symptoms and can live life in the way that feels good for them, then we support that, right? The challenge here, I think, sometimes when we encourage the social model is that people say, oh, well, but don't people need medicine? Or, we can't just throw out hospitals or care. And that's not what we're saying. We're just saying that if we say that those folks, right, medical professionals are the experts, then we lose the ability to support people's individual autonomy, and it kind of problematizes individuals' bodies as opposed to like interrogating society's role in all of that. So medicine can certainly be an aspect of how we care for and support disabled people, but we shouldn't put the power in the medical, what many people would call the medical industrial complex, to do that. This idea of like interrogating society's relationship to these things is also rooted in how large the disability umbrella is, right? This is a huge community of folks. Disability can be apparent and visible, right? As I mentioned, I'm an amputee. If you saw me from a full body, not just the Brady Bunch Zoom window, you would see that I'm missing a limb. It's apparent. It's not a surprise. It's not a secret. Wheelchair riders, little people, folks with Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, right? These are experiences that are apparent. It's visible. It's clear. Someone doesn't have to disclose or share a diagnosis for that to be evident. Whereas a non-apparent or invisible disability is something where it could be chronic illness, it could be chronic fatigue, right? You could have HIV, you could have, a cancer diagnosis, maybe a traumatic brain injury. I've mentioned like mental health, like depression, anxiety. You could have a learning disability like ADHD, or sometimes, visual or visual impairments, you could be deaf or hearing in ways that are not apparent to other people. So those are non-apparent or invisible disabilities, right? These are things that we also have to keep in mind in this whole umbrella, right? Congenital and acquired is also another way to kind of think about this. So you could be born, right, congenital, like I've mentioned for myself, with a disability, or it could be something that's acquired later in life. And the reason I have this slide is that I really want to push back against this like monolith that people can treat disability as. Right? This is a huge, diverse group of people. So my needs as an amputee might be very different than someone with autism, right? Might be very different than someone who is deaf, right? Then very different than someone who's like immunocompromised with a chronic illness. Even within the like realm of amputees, right? I'm a congenital above the knee amputee. Someone could be an acquired below the knee amputee. So I was born this way and have spent 32 years navigating that. And somebody could come into that experience from being non-disabled for like 40 years and then now become disabled. So the way that we relate to privilege and our bodies could be like vastly different despite sharing this identity as amputees. So just like we're working to interrogate language around like, you know, I wouldn't just say, oh, well, you have a new coworker coming in and they're Asian, right? That's a whole continent. It's not very helpful, right? Or just saying that someone is Black doesn't acknowledge the like vastness of the African diaspora, right? So we have to kind of think about how disability is functional in a way and is very descriptive, and in other ways is a really imperfect word given the vastness of this community of people. Ultimately today, this societal piece that we're trying to push against is against how ableism shows up, right? For those of you who haven't heard the term or aren't familiar, a very like everyday language description of this experience is ableism is the false idea that disabled people are by default inferior. This is from Michelle or at Rebel Wheels NYC. And so this is another system of oppression, right? A force that is invisible, that is acting every day in our society. It is kind of the air we breathe. It's what we are born into understanding, right? Because of how these things are just happening. And we have to actively work to undermine the ways that this force impacts people in society, right? And this false idea that disabled people are by default inferior is similar to how racism, sexism, sizeism, ageism, transphobia, homophobia, right? These groups or these systems of oppression say that this group of people is the norm, right? This group of people or this presentation, this way of being is aspirational. Anybody who aligns with it deserves more social power, more resources. They're deemed to be more desirable, all of these things. And then anyone who is different than that, it's okay to discriminate against those people, right? It's encouraged, right? People profit off of or benefit from putting those people down. So we want to keep in mind how that shows up. Another kind of more complicated definition of disability is from T.L. Lewis, right? This definition is from last year. T.L. is really incredible, is a really incredible disability justice activist who does work around wrongfully incarcerated Black deaf folks. And T.L. comes up with this kind of modified version of a definition of ableism every year. I'm just going to read this aloud because I feel like it's really important. Let me just, we gotta hydrate. So TL says, ableism is a system of assigning value to people's bodies and minds based on societally constructed ideas of normalcy, productivity, desirability, intelligence, excellence, and fitness. These constructed ideas are deeply rooted in eugenics, anti-Blackness, colonialism, imperialism, and capitalism. This systemic oppression leads to people and society determining people's value based on their culture, age, language, appearance, religion, birth or living place, quote, health and wellness, and or their ability to satisfactorily reproduce, quote, excel, and quote, behave. You do not have to be disabled to experience ableism. I'm going to read that last line one more time. You do not have to be disabled to experience ableism. I think that's really important to acknowledge, right? Is that as we get into talking about disability justice, we can see how this framework, these principles apply to everyone. Everyone benefits from disability justice, right? It's not just about supporting disabled people, because ableism harms everyone. It's just like how capitalism is harming everyone, not just people who are of lower socioeconomic status. It's not just, it's like how white supremacy harms white people, right? Not at the same rates that it harms Black, Indigenous, and people of color, but it still harms everyone. And so this is, you know, in a similar vein. I'm gonna offer some examples of how I believe that TL's definition of ableism plays out, right? Especially in these constructed, or these socially constructed ideas, right? So first, let's think about, TL mentioned intelligence, right? How does our culture measure intelligence? I have this GIF of Bart Simpson playing chess against multiple people, right? And I think there are certain ways, particularly in academia, that we can communicate who is intelligent and what the values, how much we value those specific types of intelligence, right? So one way that I think about that is like, sometimes we think the people who answer first or the fastest are also the most intelligent. I think it's fair to say that many of us have been in places or meetings where the person who answers first doesn't necessarily have the most valuable contribution, right? Or maybe somebody is an internal processor and they just need time. And the folks who simmer and sit with a thought actually really contribute something profound, right? Or significant, but they just need time. But I think, again, in even the game show metaphor of it all, right? The buzzer is always about who answers first. So we're kind of lifting up or venerating speed, and ignoring the fact that people have different cognitive processing abilities, right? That maybe the language that we're offering something isn't in someone's first language. You know, maybe somebody's had a long day. It's their like 7th Zoom meeting of the day. All of these things can impact how quickly someone responds, but that's not necessarily a reflection of their value or worth in a space. Same with things like using big words, right? Or quoting kind of like the literary canon, or certain things that are treated as like the you know, ways to like present as like, oh, I'm referencing this like this esoteric thing. You know, yes, people might use really big words, and that might be a reflection of their vocabulary, but sometimes people use big words just to sound smart. They're not necessarily using it right? Or people who aren't using big words are communicating thoughts that other people can access much easier and are doing a better job connecting community, rather than kind of creating these like rarefied conversations, right? Creating this distance between who can understand and who can't. I also think about like emotional intelligence, right? So somebody who is really emotionally intelligent is a huge value to a space. They might not have a PhD, they might not have a big title, but if they can help hold heart space, if they can be in tune with themselves and be able to like repair through conflict, right? These kind of things. Just because somebody has letters behind their name or a big title doesn't mean that they necessarily know how to show up, you know, in answer or in space like that, right? I want to just pause because I'm seeing some contributions in the chat and I want to acknowledge them. I saw someone mention ideas around language. I'm going to actually talk about that later in the workshop, so I definitely want to explore that. Someone also offered, this format, which is only typing answers, definitely does not, it isn't as inclusive as it could be to people of all sorts of disabilities. I know particularly Zoom can be challenging for people who are blind or low vision, right, to be able to access these kind of features. Particularly the Q&A isn't necessarily the best. This is absolutely an imperfect kind of vehicle for those things. So I appreciate that acknowledgement, right, where the access features of this style format are not in alignment with the most expansive and inclusive way to hold space, right, and to invite participation. Kelly named, I see them playing out during the pandemic. I think people do not understand burnout, and it takes years to recover, and how it can affect people, which what may seem normal for others may now be difficult, right, for others, which I believe is my next slide. We'll see. Yeah. Kelly teed me up for this slide on productivity, right? TL's definition of ableism, talking about constructed ideas of productivity. When we think about what our culture's relationship is to work, again, leading questions, it's not great. We certainly have ways that our relationship to work isn't healthy, right, or sustainable. I have David Rose here, just like very exasperated, saying it's too much. When we think about like hiring practices, performance reviews, promotions, a lot of times I see these things rooted in like quantity over quality, right? If you have done more things, if you stay at work longer, if you are kind of like more present than other staff, then sometimes people are like more competitive candidates for hiring or promotions, or you get a higher performance review. And it doesn't take into consideration, like maybe somebody's a working parent and they can't stay later, right? Or have to leave early sometimes, or maybe somebody's disabled and like can only work kind of what's listed in the job description. And that doesn't mean that they care less about the work. It doesn't mean that they are less qualified to be hired or promoted, but we uplift kind of the people who like, work, as opposed to looking at like what value are they contributing necessarily. We have these things like grind culture, also culture, people like kind of bragging almost about pushing themselves to burnout. There's not necessarily like, even ideas around like laziness, right? Quote, laziness is viewed as like a bad thing. If you're having, if you're taking time off, if you're resting, people make a lot of comments about laziness, which can be wrapped up in ableism and racism and all sorts of ideas around like who's supposed to produce and what that looks like. I even think about like conversations in the pandemic, right? Kelly brought this up, early in the pandemic, people, when we were in quarantine and, sheltering in place, people are like, I'm going to learn a new language, right? I'm going to teach myself an instrument. I'm going to leave with a skill. Those are very, honorable efforts. There's no judgment in that, but just thinking about the fact that we were surviving like a global cataclysm and people were trying to leave feeling productive, right? It's not just like, let's take care of each other, let's survive, right? Let's be kind to ourselves and our body minds. It was like people were still finding a way to work, even in the face of like catastrophe. Even work pacing expectations, right? I was in a job where it felt like work pace did not lighten up. We did not really slow down, and we were expected to like still show up in the same way despite everything that was happening around us, despite the like very real threat of death in our world. So we have to think about, again, who is impacted by these things, like not just disabled people, but anybody feeling this pressure to be productive. The last example I'll cover right now is this idea of normalcy. Another socially constructed idea. I've got a a gif of Captain Hook here because I'm thinking about how is disability normalized in our culture. A lot of times, media representation of disability is also not great. You know, we've got many antiquated or reductive portrayals of disability that are either like villainous, pitiable, or like this like inspiration, right? There's research that shows the Ruderman Foundation did this white paper, I believe sometime in like the mid 2010s, and it said that despite the US Census naming that 20 to 25% of US adults are living with a disability, that 2% of main characters in TV shows were disabled. So that's a huge discrepancy between the very real, like normal presentation of disability in our culture, right? A fifth to a quarter of our community is disabled, but only 2% of the people represented on TV are disabled. And then on top of that, 95% of those characters who were disabled were played by non-disabled people. So it kind of normalizes this erasure. Like disability is not present in our community. Disabled people aren't protagonists, love interests, best friends, sidekicks, any of those kind of things. Like, we're just not there. And if we are, it's usually in very specific ways and played by people who don't share those lived experiences. Normalcy can also play into like how we think disability looks. So you think about, you know, like the accessible placard with the wheelchair rider, right? That can play into the idea that people with non-visible disabilities, people with like 4 limbs and no assistive technology aren't disabled. And so if somebody says that they need care, people are like, well, you don't look sick, right? Why do you need that support? You know, I'm curious about like leadership demographics in the CSU. Like, is disability represented in staff, in faculty, in leadership, right? Is it considered normal for disabled people to have positions of authority, positions of power? What does that do for other staff or students to see how disability is or is not represented or reflected? And the last thing is, I'll say, like, you know, we live in a society where most of the times things are not universally designed. It's not designed so that people can just access it regardless of your ability. And so oftentimes people have to opt in to get their access needs met as opposed to it just being met outright. So we have to kind of challenge this idea that like it's normal for people to have access needs as opposed to like only some people have those needs. I'm going to play this video of Patty Byrne and the late Stacey Parker Byrne talking about their relationship to ableism to kind of help exemplify what this looks like for people in their lives. So I love bringing in Patty and Stacey for that conversation, right? And I'm trying to pull my slides up again. I was also trying to like answer some of the questions that I could tell that was slowing the video down. So that's why I kind of stopped trying to do too much as productivity is sneaking in as well. Let's see, I'm pulling this back up. So we've got about 15 or 20 minutes left in our game show, right before the end. And so I'm going to keep moving forward with time. Please do keep using the Q&A if there are questions that are coming up that you'd like me to kind of like answer when we get to the end or throughout. But let me pull this back up. All right. So I feel like we've kind of covered, right, this idea of ableism, how it shows up, and now we're going to talk about disability justice as an opportunity to address that, right, to mitigate those harms. Disability justice, to kind of go back in time, right, to understand its origins, came from the disability civil rights movement, which exploded in San Francisco in 1977 with the 504 protests. If you have seen, Crip Camp, right, they cover this in detail. This photo on the left is from Anthony Tussler. This is the sit-in, right, where disabled folks occupied a government building in downtown San Francisco for 26 days. This is the longest unarmed occupation of a federal building in US history. I didn't learn about that until I was 24, right? And so this is history that's very erased, right? Often not included in the trajectory of US civil rights conversations, and also has so many beautiful moments that are accentuations of what will lead to disability justice as a framework, right? This photo on the right is a photo of Bradley Lomax, who was a Black Panther. And so his presence in this movement brought together some cross-solidarity movement between the Black Panthers and the protesters of this disability civil rights movement. And it created like sustainability, right? The Black Panthers bringing them hot meals helped the protesters stay longer. This explosion of a disability civil rights movement eventually led to the Americans with Disabilities Act. And this act, the ADA, you often will hear people say, oh, is this space ADA compliant? Are we being ADA accessible? Absolutely talks about access features, but what is also often ignored is that the ADA is anti-discrimination legislation. So in the ways that we have to think about disabled people as like a protected class, a people, as a group of people with a politicized identity, you know, this legislation exists because of the institutionalized ableism that has existed in the country, right? I could cover all sorts of very and grim laws that existed around like eugenics, around voting, around all of these kind of things. This is a part of to disrupt, dismantle. Okay, I see from the chat that my sound is breaking up. How am I doing now? Okay, they said my video, so I'll try that. Trying to make sure that we can get to the end. On this screen right now is I'm calling the Disability Justice All-Stars, right? This is photos of the folks who coined this framework, these terms. On the upper left side, that's Patty Byrne and Stacey Park Milburn in the middle, who we watched that video of. And then we've got Sebastian Margaret in the top right. In the bottom left is Eli Clare. In the middle, Leroy Moore, and on the bottom right is Mia Mingus. And so these folks coined this framework. They with Patty's leadership, helped write this set of principles, these guidelines, this way of being, right? That's elevating what the disability civil rights movement started. These principles, right? These 10 principles are included in a public blog post, right, by Patty Byrne. This is available online, called Disability Justice: A Working Draft. And the 10 principles are listed here, right? They are intersectionality, leadership of the most impacted, anti-capitalism, cross-movement organizing, wholeness, sustainability, cross-disability solidarity, interdependence, collective access, and collective liberation. For time, I won't go into each of these, but the two key principles that I always ensure to highlight are that disability justice is intersectional, right? That's why this framework was born, is that disability civil rights was a single issue movement. They were just focused on getting rights for disabled people, and they weren't considering the complexities and the nuances within that community. So they weren't thinking about how Black disabled people experience racism and sexism. They weren't thinking about how trans disabled people experience transphobia and ableism. And so disability justice is not only thinking about that from that analytical perspective, but also uplifting and centering those who are most marginalized to be the leaders of the movement. So if you ever hear people talk about disability justice and it's just white people, right? Or if you're hearing people talk about disability justice and there's no acknowledgement of the ways that other systems of oppression intersect, it's not disability justice. You have to be considering these intersectional approaches, and the voices and experiences who are leading it must be those who are most marginalized. So those are key things to keep in mind when you're exploring how to embody or embrace those practices. Of course, when we talk about intersectionality, I just want to, pay credit where credit is due. This is from Kimberly Crenshaw, right? In her work in 1989, she, as a lawyer, right, explored the ways that racism and sexism were impacting the clients that she was representing. So this is kind of the birth of this term, or the place that it was coined. We're looking at how oppressive institutions are interconnected and cannot be examined separately from one another. I have this video, again, as I meant to say at the beginning, and I think I slipped my mind, all of the resources that I cover here are on a free resource guide on my website. So anything that I'm kind of moving quickly past or not really touching on fully, that's available. I don't want you to kind of wonder where it's at. So I'm not going to show this video, but this is a thumbnail of Antoine Hunter. He's a Black deaf dancer in the Bay Area. And this is a video of him talking about his relationship to disability justice. I'll highlight something an important point that he makes in the video, but I highly recommend. So some quick examples of how we can think about intersectionality showing up in everyday life, right, or culture. We can think about accessible all gender bathrooms, right, because of the ways that both disabled people need to be able to physically access a bathroom, right? It has to have disabled stalls, it has to have access features. But if the bathrooms are gendered, right, if they're for men and women, then we're not considering the ways that there might be trans or genderqueer, gender non-binary disabled people who could experience gender-based violence in binary bathrooms. So if they are all gender and accessible, you are attending to both of those marginalized experiences. The hashtag why I didn't report happened after the Kavanaugh confirmations, where women came forward on Twitter and shared stories of why they didn't report their relationship to sexual violence or sexual assault. And many disabled women said that because of ableism, with the paternalism that shows up, they felt like they had to spend their lives fighting for sexual autonomy, right? Maybe they live with family, maybe they're in assisted living. And so if they experience sexual assault, they were concerned that reporting it might increase people's paternalism and prevent them from having autonomy in their sexual lives, right? And so sexism and ableism were coming together to prevent these women from feeling the safety of both reporting these incidences and maintaining their own autonomy. There are very grim reports of trans women of color, trans undocumented women of color in ICE detention centers being denied HIV treatment, right, and dying because of it. And so these are experiences where the racism, the transphobia, the misogyny, and the ableism present in those spaces prevented them from getting their needs met. In the video, Antoine Hunter talks about being Black and deaf and the fear that he has of police brutality, right? Black deaf people can't respond to stop and freeze. They don't hear what's going on. They don't know what's happening. There are incidents of Black people who are having mental health episodes, or developmentally disabled Black people being shot and killed, right? There are increased risks of Black disabled people being shot and killed at the hands of police than other white disabled people or people in general, right? I see a question in the chat that is asking, I'm wondering where fat liberation fits in with disability justice. I've heard some folks situate fat phobia as a disability issue because of the way that fat folks are excluded from particular spaces based on their physical design. in your view, are fat liberation and disability justice part of the same project? So this last point I have is just hearing both reports of and anecdotes in my friend groups of fat women with chronic illness not getting their needs met by doctors because the fat phobia present in those spaces. Doctors are just telling them, well, it's you're fat, that's why you are unwell. And they're not really attending to people's symptoms or presentations. So in those situations, right, sexism, fat phobia, and ableism coming together to cause harm, right, and violence. To the question that's being asked, I've heard both arguments, right, of treating fat liberation and disability justice as either kind of like more synonymous or kind of like partner or like cross movement solidarity projects. I personally, in my experience, have heard more of the latter, right, where people treat disability justice as something that can be informed by fat liberation and vice versa. I think the reason why I would separate them is because I don't want to communicate that like fatness is a disability. And I know that's not necessarily what the question is communicating either, but you know, the impacts of an inaccessible environment, of an inaccessible or hostile world towards I'm saying in quotes, non-normative bodies is absolutely harmful to both disabled people and fat people. But I think the ideas around why those groups of people are oppressed and the manifestations of those oppressions do show up in enough different ways that I think it's important to differentiate those things. For time, I'll just kind of like read quickly. I thought of some ideas of how intersectionality might be a relevant tool, analysis tool in the CSU. You know, I imagine maybe you have a trans staff member who uses a breathing device, who opts to be off camera, right, on Zoom often. You know, maybe they experience transphobic microaggressions based on their appearance and feel like they have to deal with a lot of scrutiny around their breathing device. So being off camera might just feel safer. And we know that sometimes people pressure people to be on camera or treat people who are on camera as like more present. So that's just something to think about. Maybe you have an immigrant student who is quote, ignoring invitations for disability services, right? Just because there's a disability resource center on campus doesn't mean that it necessarily feels safe or accessible to all disabled students, right? And we know that like documentation or becoming more involved in a system can feel like frightening or disarming to folks who are undocumented or who are immigrants. And so maybe the student is less willing to like engage with that, right? Less because of their needs around a disability, but more of their comfort of trusting systems and institutions. The last example that came to mind is maybe of an immunocompromised Asian or Asian American Pacific Islander student who's requesting remote learning. So as we know in the pandemic, anti-Asian violence really increased, right? Because of this harmful and racist rhetoric. And so if a student both doesn't feel safe to take public transportation due to like people not wearing masks anymore, right? And also fear of violence, right, around their racial identity. If professors are pressuring students to show up in person, or again, if students who show up in person are valued more, then that's excluding the student or they're creating inequities for the student to get their needs met. Going to kind of keep up the pace just for time. I'm going to read this quote from Patty. I feel like it's an excellent summation of disability justice in general. There's a photo of Leroy Moore here, a Black disabled man, at the bottom of this quote. It says, "All bodies are unique and essential. All bodies are whole. All bodies have strengths and needs that must be met. We are powerful not despite the complexities of our bodies, but because of them. We move together with no body left behind. This is disability justice." And so I'd love in the chat if you want to react to that, or in the Q&A if you have any questions about this quote or just reactions. I love this quote, particularly the middle line. I feel like it exemplifies what I love about disability justice so much, is that it positions all bodies' uniqueness as powerful, right? Right, we are powerful not despite the complexities of our bodies, but because of them. And so I think this really upends the relationship to how people treat disability or difference as deficit. Really, this is like treating it as an add, right, or generative. So when we think about celebrating disability culture, I'm going to just kind of zoom through this so that way we have time for for question and discovery. A lot of this is also on my resource guide. You know, earlier someone asked a question about language. I always invite thinking about thinking about just being really matter of fact or specific, right? So sometimes I think we use euphemistic language, things like special needs, handy capable, differently abled. I even heard person of determination recently. People have preferences. I don't want to communicate anything on this slide as like the right answer. It's just invitations. I think things like special needs and differently abled aren't very specific, right? Everyone has needs. Everyone has different abilities. It's not telling you something that you could use as like how to meet someone's accommodations, right? If you say someone is blind, that helps communicate at least a little more specificity around what they might need, versus if you say they're differently abled, we're all differently abled, right? So it's not really getting to the matter of what's going on. There's also stigmatizing language, right? Like words like crazy, cripple, lame, stupid, right? These are words that people use often in our like vernacular, right? Our cultural language, and maybe people aren't intentionally trying to be ableist or bring up ableist harm, but these words have been used as violence against disabled people throughout history, right? So we have to think about how we can be stigmatizing beyond that. So just being matter of fact, right? Somebody says, I'm autistic. This student is living with a chronic illness. My coworker is deaf. Maybe someone has neurodivergent pride, right? You're following kind of both what's going on and how someone wants to identify. We're pulling on these ideas of cultural humility. So whether someone wants to use person first language or identity first language, it's really imperative that we think about these kind of things. Just like we ask people about their pronouns, we can ask people how they identify in relationship to disability if they're comfortable sharing. I've got some memes here, right? There's one that says, see the person, not the disability, right? Which is kind of this, and there's a photo of a wheelchair rider that's cropped. It's kind of a misguided attempt at trying to do person first language. If it said, see the person, then the disability, then it's inviting them both and, but saying, see the person, not the disability is kind of like drawing upon the same energy as like colorblind messaging, right? Or like, we're post-racial, right? I don't see your disability, but I need you to see my disability, right? I need you to see that this is a part of me and my body and my lived experience. I need you to see that I need support and accommodations in an ableist world. And I need you to see that I have pride in community. This is a part of history. And when you try to like ignore it to see my personhood, you're actually like cutting out part of myself. There's another image here that says no excuses. This is something that happens a lot, right? This is what disabled people refer to as inspiration porn. And it's basically kind of using the success of disabled people, their triumph, as a means of inspiring yourself. But what it's doing, it's at the cost of disabled people's ability to just like move through the world without being like consumed, right? Or extracted. No excuses makes it sound like having a disability is an excuse, and we don't want to do that, right? It's about society creating an environment where someone might feel like their disability is an excuse, and that's what we want to interrogate. We want to upend. I have a whole collage here. I was feeling creative for this one. This quote is, "The only disability in life is a bad attitude." Right? And what does this do? What is this saying? It's basically communicating that the only reason you're having a problem is because you have a bad attitude. You just need to like cheer up, get over it. It's just, you just live in an ableist society. You're just dealing with tons of inaccessible spaces and microaggressions. That's all. If you just had a better attitude about it, you wouldn't feel so challenged. You wouldn't be dealing with those kind of things. I think these kind of memes are really insidious too, because, you know, sure, we have these ones of disabled folks being active and impressive, right? This is that inspiration porn, but we also have, you know, people love to do like cutesy things of disabled kids, right? To try to bring in these kind of things. There's even a disabled dog to communicate this message. So just want to caution around what we're consuming, what we're perpetuating around messaging of disability. Did disabled people create it? Is it something that they back up, right? Or is it aligned with disability justice? If you're looking for practical ways to make your classrooms, your work culture, your campus more accessible, I encourage you to look into Access is Love. This is a campaign by Mia Mingus, Alice Wong, and Sandy Ho. They've got 10 steps for increasing accessibility in spaces, and a ton of resources to do so, right? So I encourage you to check that out. I also want to just highlight this idea of analyzing your feed, right? Mandy Harris Williams is an artist and an organizer, and has this idea of hashtag brown up your feed to like interrogate the makeup of who's on your social media feed. Mainstream media is not going to give us what we need in terms of marginalized stories being told or told well. So you have the power to curate your social media feed. If you want to see more disabled stories, follow them, right? So, you know, I have this slideshow or this collage, right? These are disabled folks that I follow, you know, on social media: Amani Barbarin, Danielle Perez, Aaron Phillips, Chella Mann, Eric Escareno, Gabe Taylor, right? King Lotus Boy. I included myself again because I'm a Leo. I can't help it. But you know, there's all these like melanated, you know, this is mostly like queer group of folks, right, with disabilities sharing their lived experiences on social media for us to learn from, right, and for free. There's also YouTube stars that you can tune into. I've featured this video. It's on my resource guide, right, from Annie Elaney around ableist language. Robin Lambert in the next slide has a YouTube video about person first language. It looks like my slides are kind of gunking up on me, so I'll just keep sharing. But there's also like disabled authorship out there, right? If you are more of a reader and you're not on social media, I've got this whole slide of disabled authors from Alice Wong, Kia Brown, right? Leah Lakshmi, Piepsna Samrasina. I've mentioned Patty Byrne, Leroy Moore, right? The late Judy Heumann. All of these folks have written texts that if you want to engage with those, you can, right? It's out there. Even films, right? I've mentioned Crip Camp. There's also Superfest, is a disability film festival made for and by disabled people. You can book Superfest to do a showcase at your campus, and you curate the festival based on all the past winners. So really, you know, if people are saying, well, I don't know where to turn, or there's not enough out there, it's not really true. It's not reflective of where we're at culturally. And I'll just do a shout out, you know, my work around disability justice. Prior to the pandemic, I hosted workshops and really just basked in the joy and like revelry of connecting through disability justice as like this like community building exercise, right? I hosted workshops in San Francisco, in LA, New York, right? And really brought people together around disability justice. So just again, a reminder, if you feel like these conversations are going to like slow things down or inherently be heavy, I just like all of these smiling faces, I always tap into anytime I'm thinking about that. So a time check. If there are any questions that y'all have, this is the time to throw them in the chat. I'm going to review anything else that came up. While questions come in, I just want to do a quick acknowledgement. This game show couldn't have come together without Audrina, Jamila, Leslie, Kiara. I want to give a shout out to the interpreters. Thank you, Sydney and Janina. Jean, my agent, Dr. Cronister and Dr. Fitzgerald at SF State, as well as Emily Smith-Badix and Kathy Kudlik at the Longmore Institute on Disability. Definitely really grateful for them. You can contact me at alex@glynpt.com if you have further questions, or just check out my resource guide. But I'm going to look at the Q&A, see if there's anything coming in or anything that I might have missed. But please feel free to use this time.
I don't see new ones, new questions.
Yeah.
I had some myself, but you answered them as we were going through.
Oh, great.
Yeah, I was going to ask about next steps and what can we do, but then you gave that wonderful resource already.
Yes.
This
Yes,
is love.
definitely.
Yeah, so I'll just check that out for the Disability Caucus.
Yeah. Thank you, Billy. I'm grateful that you all were here with me today.
A wealth of information. I'm just like scribbling like crazy, writing stuff down. That's how I process. And just excited to be able
I know, I was like,
like,
yeah, I was like, oh, 90 minutes, that's, I can get through that. And we definitely still have so much more we could have explored. So I know I kind of sped up towards the end, but I see some gratitude in the chat. I really appreciate the attendance, their presence. If there's anything else in this last minute,
I think
otherwise,
one thing is just have folks go to your resource, right, to your website.
Yes.
And see what's there.
Yeah, please do. I have podcasts, I have interviews. If you want to learn more about me, you're welcome to do so. If you want to bring me to your campus, we can have a more expansive conversation. I definitely have done this in like 2 hours. I've done half-day trainings. I have a microaggressions workshop specifically around disability. So if you want to do kind of a series and build on things, we don't have to kind of rush through everything together. But I just wanted to offer this little, this little splash, this little taste, right? I hope you had fun at the game show.
It's bigger than a splash. It's a whole wave.
Cannonball, yes.
It's a whole wave.
Yes,
And
well,
then to remind everyone too that we have the landing page link, I believe, in the chat, right? That you can go to on the CFA website, and then we can pull up your information, Alex's information. There's resources there as well.
Yeah.
So I'm just looking to see if there's any last comments or questions.
Yeah, I see, just really quickly, I see from Craig asking if I'll teach at State again. I am in conversation with the counseling department. That's where I've taught in the past, so definitely keep an eye out. And addressing internalized ableism, just, that is a big one. That's very difficult. And something that I know I'm always still, says we are so saturated with inspiration porn, even those of us who live with disabilities carry these things. In the last minute that we have, I will just say that seeking out content from disabled people, like the folks that I featured as authors, or learning about people in history, finding these possibility models of disabled people who do triumph, right? But I get to see the complexity of that triumph. I think complexity and texture help to kind of undermine that inspiration porn, right? It adds 3 dimensions. I understand better how someone is an inspiration, not just because I think a lot of inspiration porn is rooted in the assumption that disabled people can't do things. So then when they do, that's when it's inspiring. So when you learn about all of the effort and interdependence and community and like practice or labor that gets people to those places where we learn about what they're doing or we hear about their stories, I think for me that helps me interrogate, why have I internalized this idea that as a disabled person I can't do as much as I know that I can, or I can't be as big as I know that I can be. Being in community with disabled people, centering those stories always helps me kind of like laugh at those images because I'm like, it's so ridiculous, right? And it's ridiculous because I see disabled people like thriving all the time in the face of that kind of messaging.
Excellent. A nice closure to
Thank you.
everything.